Welcome to episode 3 of my top 50 pinball machines. The leaderboard is getting started. You can just see it up there. We got Attack from Mars in top place. We've got Medieval Madness second, Judge Dredd third, and propping up the foundations of the list are Popeye. What are we dealing with today? We're dealing with Avengers Infinity Quest. Now this is a really interesting game for a number of reasons, and this is going to take a little while to go through this one. I've got to say, there might be a controversial ending to this video, so there'll be a few of you watching this now who are probably wondering whereabouts it's going to go on that list. Where I put it on that list is not going to make everybody happy. I've got to say that now, but please do remember, it is my list, and these are my preferences, and I've got quite a quirky, nuanced way of assessing pinball machines, which we'll go through in just a second. I've had Avengers Infinity Quest on 2 occasions. I bought one, but before that, I got a chance to sample it first. So I was loaned one. I've got to actually thank Chris B Pinballs and, of course, Pinball Heaven, who allowed me to loan this machine. I think I had it for 3 months, actually, so I was able to learn a bit about it. I was going to say learn an awful lot about it. I don't think you ever really know an awful lot about Avengers Infinity Quest unless you are very, very good and very studious. But we'll get to that in just a moment. As ever, the criteria for this particular rating and ranking system, let's put it that way, the league table, are not exactly the same as the Pinside Top 100. That is a lot more systematic. It has to be, because what they're doing is getting an average of everybody's opinion. Mine are slightly different. I'm looking at things, for instance, with fun. Is the machine fun? That's got to be the first one. Has the machine stayed around for a long time? Is it intuitive? What are the shots like? Does it have good gimmicks? Is it approachable for a newbie? There are a lot of factors, but what it boils down to at the end is I have to have had it in this house. That's the one and only criteria. So if you're wondering why one of your favourite games isn't up on this list, particularly once the list starts to fill out a bit, it's because I haven't had it here. Now, I've got to say that Craig, who's been doing the voiceovers and been given the second opinion on these videos so far, because I do think it's important to have a second opinion on a lot of the games, and there will be other people aside from Craig doing it. Craig did phone me the other day, and he said, "You know what, mate?" I said, "I think we need to get Roadshow on here." So Roadshow is one of his favourite games. In fact, that is his avatar name. It's his username on the Pinball Info Forum. And so he's so keen for me to enjoy the delights of Roadshow that he's going to lend me his Roadshow, because it has to have been in this house. And that's not so as I can sort of contrive some system where people lend me pinball machines. They were doing that already. But it is so as I can assess them fairly. It's not fair to assess a pinball machine that you've learnt the rules of, that has lived in your house for a few weeks, with one that you might have played once or twice out on location. And I just also want to point out that this whole channel is a voyage discovery for me. Whilst I played pinball machines in arcades when I was younger, I never owned a pinball machine until 2000. It was really 2018 where I really got into the hobby. So there are a lot of games which I haven't played even. I mentioned Twilight Zone in episode 2's video. I've played Twilight Zone about 3 times. I don't know it at all. So there are a lot of games that I don't know which won't feature on that list. But as I say, always remember, for me to rank the game and rate it, it has to be in this house or have been in this house. So we get on to Avengers Infinity Quest, which has been here twice. Okay. Got a lot to say about this game. It's a tough game. It's a really, really tough game to learn. I would suggest Avengers Infinity Quest is not at all intuitive. That being said, the shots on it, I think, are unrivaled. I'm struggling to think of a game that has better all-round shots than this particular game. It's a Keith Elwin game. There are a lot of people who absolutely love Keith Elwin and think everything he does is a home run. I don't, which we'll get into in other episodes. Although I do really like Jurassic Park. I have a Godzilla, which will be going nowhere. I think it's brilliant. The paths the ball takes, wonderful, really wonderful. And I like Avengers Infinity Quest. And I say I like it. I do like it. But I have found myself on numerous occasions just sort of hitting the shots because they are so much fun. The big fat wide ramp on it, up as you look at it on the top right side of the playfield, it's wonderful. When I'm describing it, I am describing the pro version. That's probably worth noting. But I'm talking about the big ramp at the top right of the playfield. You can hit it off the upper flip. You can hit it off any flipper. It's brilliant. It's got to be up there as one of the best ramps that I've played, certainly. I really like the orbit shot. The orbit shot takes a little jump. Or is it maybe the Black? It might be the Black Panther shot. Quite possibly goes round the back of the playfield. I think that's really cool. The Captain America loop. Oh, that's a really good shot as well. I find the disc, the spinning disc, that you have to hit that, and I call it the Benedict Cumberbatch shot, because he's the guy that in the films, I think he played Doctor Strange, didn't he? Now, it's worth pointing out that this game is not based on the films. It's based on the comic books. But anyway, so yes, I call that the Benedict Cumberbatch shot. I found it it's really sort of satisfying to hit that. And I think the way it's incorporated in a couple of the modes is quite clever as well. I think the Hawkeye drop shot is really good. And where you've got to hit that into, it's pretty much a vertical shot, like a vertical ramp. Then a magnet locks it in position. That's very, very good. There's a lot to like about that. And I think the middle shot, there's a steeper ramp. There's a steeper ramp. In fact, that might be Captain America. I should know, really, shouldn't I? But honestly, there's so many of these games that I played, I'm sort of overwhelmed and swamped by these games. But the middle, very, very steep ramp, that's really, really satisfying as well. So in terms of the shots, I think it's brilliant. I really do. Unfortunately, I do think the game is overcomplicated for me. When you get a game from Stern, you can go onto their website and you can get the rule sheet, which I think are downloadable in a PDF. Now, please excuse me if I've got this slightly wrong, but I don't think I'm a lot wrong. I remember going on to the Stern website to look at the rules, and the PDF was 30 pages long or something like that. It was huge. And I found it so tenuous and so complicated. And this is where I think theme really comes into play here. I love the shot so much, but I am not a fan of the Avengers. I don't watch any of this Marvel stuff, with the exception of Deadpool, of course. It doesn't count Deadpool, right? There are so many. I get that's the name of the game, to assemble all the Avengers, and that's part of it. But there are so many, I find it quite overwhelming. Then you get to the point where you're battling the bad guys. I think they might be called the Black Order. Again, there are so many of them. And it makes it incredibly complicated. And I'm not into this genre of games at all, but Thor is a character in it. I almost would have preferred the game if it was Thor and you were Thor and then you go and beat up all the bad dudes. That would have made it a little bit simpler for me and easy for me to understand. But you're collecting all these Avengers and you've got to assemble them all. And then you've got this other aspect where you're collecting these gemstones and the Infinity Stones. Sorry, I know there's people probably really into Marvel who are thinking they're slaughtering the names and the terminology of the characters. But you collect these gemstones, these Infinity Stones. And you want to collect them, but there's a dude called Thanos who's the bad guy, and he also wants to collect them. And what you do is you go through the modes, and if you complete the mode, you win the mode, you win an Infinity Stone. You then get to choose to place that Infinity Stone on one of the characters. Now, this loses me at this point. And I understand there's a lot of people who have explained it to me and said, this is really, really simple stuff. But then as the game progresses on, you can actually take one of the Infinity Stones that you've placed on one of the characters and place it on another character. You can take it away. On the playfield itself, there's some drop targets sort of on the left-hand side. And by the drop targets, there's this grid system as well. And again, it's sort of overly complicated. Also, I don't find it's in keeping with the artwork on the playfield, which is stunning. I think the game looks stunning. I think it's possibly Zombietti who did the drawings. I think they're really good. So I just find it over complicated. And as a few people have said to me, you would understand if you were into Marvel, and if you'd read the comics or you knew about the characters, it would be easier to understand. And I don't doubt that for a second. But that doesn't make the game approachable and easy to understand. So, for instance, I understand Judge Dredd. was a comic book as well. Well, I never read that either. But if I played Judge Dredd, and I only mention that because it's a comic book and it's on the list already, not having read Judge Dredd comics is not a disadvantage to playing the game. The game will let you know very much what you need to do. Now, I know it's an older game and it's a simpler game, but the depth on this game, Avengers Infinity Quest, I found was too much. Well, it was just too much for me. Now, you're probably thinking, from the way I'm talking about it, you know where this is going. You're probably already starting to think, I know where that's going to go on the list, but bear with me. Bear with me on it. I find the sound was awful. And I know this might contradict what I said in episode 2 when I spoke about Dolly Parton said not marking something down for sound, but sound plays no part in that. Whereas I don't need sound to guide me through there. The rules are so simple. It takes itself very, very seriously. So Deadpool, I love Deadpool. Deadpool's a great game. And Deadpool has an awful lot of humour. I feel Avengers Infinity Quest takes itself very, very, very seriously. So I can't. There's a point where Thor is going on about I guess the planet that he comes from, and if you don't know, it seems very, very involved. It gets very, very complicated, and when all the different members of the Black Order start coming into it, I haven't got a clue what's going on at all, and I don't feel that the call-outs help me. You get Thanos, I guess, talking trash to you every so often, which I get. I think the guy's out to rule the universe. He's not there to be polite to some guy playing a game of pinball. But I don't find them particularly helpful, and I do find them, after a while, quite nauseating, which I find quite interesting, because I always thought that I would find Godzilla annoying, because it's sort of the same soundtrack over and over again. But I don't think it takes itself seriously, and I find it hard to be, because I never read the comics, because I don't watch Marvel stuff, I find it hard to get invested in the characters.
I will allow you to reconsider your course.
So when they start taking themselves seriously, I don't really care, and I think that's the point. In a way that if I'm playing Star Wars, I do sort of care. If the evil Empire want to rule the galaxy, I care about that. I understand. Let's just say that Darth Vader carries a little bit more weight in my mind, and he takes himself seriously, and so does Star Wars by and large. But that means a little bit more to me in a way that I think Avengers Infinity Quest just doesn't, and the whole Avengers thing. Let's just go through some of my criteria and talk our way through it. So first of all, is it fun? Well, I think the shots are fun. I enjoy playing the shots. Would I call it a fun game? I wouldn't. I think it's a shooter. That's what I would call it. It's a shooter. Because of the rules are a bit of a hindrance. So let me put it this way. So Monster Bash. Hopefully most of you will know Monster Bash and enjoy Monster Bash. Monster Bash is a great game. The rules are intuitive. This is not intuitive. All I can say, if you were going to compare it to Monster Bash, can you imagine if Monster Bash was not just collect a creature and Frankenstein's monster and all the rest of it, but imagine if you had to take... You've got Dracula, a Monster Bash, and then you've got Dracula's guitar. And then what you had to do was take Dracula's guitar, and then you had to give Dracula's guitar to Creature. And then you had to give Creature's saxophone to Dracula. And then once you play Dracula's guitar with Creature, you then get to open something else. It would just that, but that's what I find Avengers Infinity Quest to be like. It's too much. It's too much to me. And because of that, I don't find the game ultimately fun. But I would hit the shots all day long. I just wish it was something else. Is it addictive? Well, the shots are addictive. The shots are addictive. There's no doubt about that at all. He's just nailed it with the shots. I just think he has. Does it have charm and does it have personality? I'm sorry, it just doesn't. It's not charming. I think it lacks personality, actually. And I think that's going to happen when, number one, you don't know the characters. Number two, when you don't care for the characters. Number three, when the characters take themselves so seriously. And then number four, when there are so many of them. It's hard for something with that many component parts, I feel, to have personality. Toys and mechanisms. It doesn't really have any, does it? It doesn't have any toys. It's quite sparse. Compare it to something like Godzilla. It's got loads. It's packed full, or even, a creature for... not creature from... Well, you could use creature if you want, but I was going to say Monster Bash. No, nothing like it. Is it approachable? No, it's not. I'm sorry, it's just not. I've had it here. I've had it here twice. People don't know what they're doing. They switch off from it. I've had a couple of really good pinball players have come around here as well. I'm not just talking about people who don't play pinball. Have come around here and they've played it before. They don't know. They say, "What do you do on this?" It's not intuitive. It doesn't know, and that goes into rules. Shots and position, I've already said, absolutely magnificent. Achievable goals, well, it depends really. Thor multi-ball, yeah, that's very achievable. The goals themselves, I mean, it's difficult. It's very, very difficult because it wants you to do so much. But I don't find it to be a punishing game. I don't ever feel with Avengers Infinity Quest that I hit a shot that it's asking me to hit and then the ball drains. Actually, I think it's very good. I do really like the layout of the shots. I'm sure you're getting that now. Rewarding and frustrating. I guess it is rewarding. Do I find it frustrating? Actually, no, I don't. I don't find it frustrating. I just start hitting the ball. I'm just happy to hit that ramp over and over again. I mean, it works really well. The upper flipper. Let's say the upper flipper on that is brilliant. I can't think of another one that's better off the top of my head at the moment, and maybe there is one, but possibly it's not in the 35 machines that I've had in this house thus far. I love the way that you can hit numerous shots of it. I love the fact that you can hit the upper ramp of that top flipper, and it's so good. I was disappointed when Godzilla didn't do that. I know, yes, sometimes you can, but by and large, it's not a shot you're meant to be hitting off that upper flipper, is hitting the ramp on Godzilla. Ultimately, it's a great looking game with great shots, but I just find it lacking. Somebody said to me once, it lacks soul, it lacks heart, and I think it does. For me, it does. Which takes it back to, do I regret it leaving? Do I miss it? I don't miss it. But there are often times when I think to myself, I wouldn't mind a little game of Avengers Infinity Quest. Which makes it a little bit tough. And in terms of popping it on the list up there, it's not as clear-cut as you might think. So before I go any further, I'm aware I've been talking for 17 minutes about Avengers Infinity Quest. A lot to say about this pinball machine. And it is odd. It's a contradictory pinball machine for me. Be easier if it was all good or it was all bad. But before I go over to the board, before I move this camera and stand in front of the board and decide where that's going to go, we always like a second opinion. And for this game, again, we're going to be consulting Craig. Craig, as you know, he is an excellent pinball player, knows an awful lot about pinball machines. He hasn't actually owned this pinball machine himself. I think he's after one, by the way, if anybody's got one. But he knows enough about this game, and Craig's the type of guy that will stay up late at night watching streams and watching other people, play games, and he will know. As he will tell you in a moment, he's got a strategy for this game, and anyone that has a strategy for a game, I would suggest, knows a game well enough. So, there's a second opinion. Here's Craig, and then I'll be back in a moment to put this somewhere on the board.
This is Keith Elwin's third design. So Keith Elwin is one of my heroes, primarily because of him as a pinball player, but he's now become one of the most esteemed, if not the most esteemed pinball designer alive today. And so Avengers Infinity Quest is his third design. I think out of his designs, it's probably the one that polarizes opinion the most. Avengers is a super established, well-known theme. It was also one that caught people off guard when it came out. I remember nobody really knew that it was going to come out. It was a really well-kept secret, this one. Most pinball machines get leaked, and Avengers didn't. It just kind of popped up, and everybody was like, oh my God, Keith Elwin design, Avengers Infinity Quest. This could be amazing. And I think it might be. I haven't played loads and loads of Avengers. I've played it enough. I've got a strategy on it in terms of what I would be doing in competition, but I've owned the other three Elwin games. And so Avengers Infinity Quest is definitely on my list of games that I want to own. It seems incredibly complex. incredibly deep, which are things that I absolutely love in Pinball Machines. The shots are fantastic, incredible, absolutely incredible shots. The flow of it, the ramps, the way that the ball moves around the playfield. You know, it's a Keith Elwin design. You know, it's so unique and so different and so interesting. I think that the complexity of the game is certainly not straightforward. I think that there is a huge amount of it that is complex, and you know, listening to Keith Elwin speak about it in podcasts and stuff, it's clear that the complexity is something that he might have missed on a little bit too much, you know. So for the majority of the pinball audience that these games are aimed at are not going to be able to understand exactly what's going on, you know, in terms of placing the gems and understanding all the perks that adds and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that, you know, like I said, he's one of my heroes. I think that the game is probably outstanding in comparison to the majority of pinball machines that are being produced. I'd certainly want to own it over pretty much any other game that's out there at the moment. So for me, it would be super high on the list. I think that for your general punter, in terms of the playing public, in comparison to something like Attack from Mars or Medieval Madness that's on the list, that's super straightforward to understand, it's going to be quite different. And so you're comparing apples and oranges in terms of that, which is great, and that's why this list is so cool. You know, because you are comparing stuff that's made in 1996 or 1997 to something that was made 2 years ago in 2020. You know, so you know, I think that's great, and I think that's really, really exciting. But yeah, for me, Avengers Infinity Quest is something that's really cool, really, really interesting. A brilliant playfield, a brilliant shot map, some really incredibly deep, complex rules that are hard to understand, and a game that I would really love to own.
So, here we have it, Avengers Infinity Quest. Not as easy as you might think. Now, you might remember from the first episode, I said when things get tight, I'm going to ask myself a couple of questions. And the first one will be to make sure that every machine has a value of £1. Otherwise, I don't want money factoring it in. For instance, you know, if I thought that Popeye and Avengers Infinity Quest were exactly the same, and they're not in my level, in my standards, I'd probably just still take this because this is worth thousands of pounds more. And you know, so I don't want to take money out of it. So then it comes down to if I was offered it back. So we'll start now. If I was offered Avengers Infinity Quest or Popeye, and they were both worth the same money, what would I take right now? I would take Avengers Infinity Quest. I would, despite everything that I've said. Judge Dredd. If I were offered, you were stood there with me now saying you can either have a Judge Dredd or Avengers Infinity Quest, I would probably take Avengers Infinity Quest. I probably would. And this is where this system becomes a little bit more flawed. And this is why it's going to become very interesting and why things might get moved around. Would I take Avengers Infinity Quest or Attack from Mars? I'd take Attack from Mars, wouldn't even think twice about it. And this is where it gets interesting. Because if you were stood there in front of me now and you said, I've got a Judge Dredd or I've got a Medieval Madness, what would you take? I'd probably take the Judge Dredd. But Medieval Madness is above it. Figure that one out. So it becomes, the real question is, if I were to have one pin, both worth the same money, Medieval Madness or Avengers Infinity Quest, what would I take? I would take Avengers Infinity Quest. And for that reason, it's going to live, for the moment, right there in second position. Controversial, I know. I will justify it by saying, I think if that was the case and it was my only game, I think I'd learn it. I think I'd learn those pesky rules. I think it would annoy me over time. I think the call-outs would annoy me. But I just feel that I probably miss Avengers Infinity Quest more than I miss Medieval Madness. And if I'm honest, the more I thought about it, I actually got a little bit bored of Medieval Madness. And the last week it was here, I played everything else but Medieval Madness. But it has to stay there because it's such a good game. I'm not oblivious to its charms. Certainly not. And I didn't expect that board to look like that. And it's making me quite eager to do the next game, which you'll have to wait. I've done a few. I need to get on and do some of my own actual work. So you'll have to wait a little bit for the next video on this, I'm quite sure. But there you go. Let me know what you think about that in the comments below. And thank you so much for all your interactions. Thank you so much, Craig, for your input on it as well. There you go. 5 games in. That's how the board is looking.